Good evening and welcome to Freedom is a Constant Struggle with your host Kidu Nyasha, and board hopping is Jackie Perez. I'm delighted to bring you a show today with two wonderful sisters, Sister Favia Kujichagalia and Sister Rhonda Ramiro. And first we're going to start with Rhonda Ramiro, who is founder of Bayan USA and has been active in the movement for national democracy in the Philippines since the 1990s. Founded in 2005, Bayan USA established the first overseas chapter of the Philippine-based Bagong Aliansong Makabayan. Yes. Did I destroy it?
No.
New
Great.
Patriotic Alliance, or Bayan for short, a nationwide multi-sectoral alliance of over 1,000 grassroots people's organizations with a membership of more than 1 million people fighting for national and social liberation in the Philippines. Rhonda serves as Secretary General of Bayan USA from 2009 to 2012 and is currently serving her second term as Vice Chair through 2018. Thank you so much, Rhonda, for joining us on Freedom is a Constant Struggle. It's so good to see you again.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Yes, we had you once before.
Yes.
It's been years, though.
That's
So
right.
We'll get a real update, and more do we need to learn about the Philippines now.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh.
There's a lot going on.
Yes, and you just returned from the Philippines. Tell us about the trip.
That's right. I was there in November, and it coincided with President Trump's visit to the Philippines as well. Not a coincidence. We were there to join protest actions against Trump and other world leaders throughout Asia who were there for what was called the Asia Pacific Economic Conference. So a summit of heads of state who were there talking about trade, military, economic policy affecting the region, but of course without the mandate of the grassroots people on the ground. So they were cutting deals at the highest levels and really reaffirming the relationship that the Philippines and the U.S. have shared since the turn of the last century, since the end of the 1890s. Basically reaffirming a colonial relationship between the two.
Right. Now, is the military base still there?
So they're not there in name, but they're there.
They're there.
Yes, they are really there. So the U.S. has never left militarily.
Yeah, they claim to have left some time ago.
Correct.
When was that?
So in 1999,
Yeah.
there was a really strong and successful effort to kick the U.S. bases out.
Right, I remember that.
Right, it was a huge victory in Asia, and the Philippines was considered the floating base, basically, for the U.S. military. But soon after, new agreements were made to allow the U.S. military to come and visit. They would call it the Visiting Forces Agreement. So they could station troops there temporarily, occupy Philippine bases and installments, as long as they weren't having their own U.S. bases on Philippine soil. So it's a tricky way of basically coming and reoccupying the land. And actually, it made it worse because then the U.S. military could operate in public airports and seaports and Philippine military's airports and seaports without paying any rent.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when they were there before, they were pretty much confined to the base and the ship?
A little bit more so. So they
Yeah.
would still conduct exercises and so forth. But at least there were, yes, base areas. Now, the whole archipelago, all 7,100 islands, could be fair game for
I didn't know
U.S.
there were
military.
7,100 islands.
Yes.
Wow.
Fair game for U.S. military. And
Wow, yeah.
Recently, so in 2014, under Obama and former President Aquino, a new military agreement was signed called the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. And so they actually expanded the ability of the U.S. to occupy even more airspace, seaports, Philippine bases. People are considering it the virtual return of U.S. military bases to the country. Mm-hmm.
Well, that doesn't surprise me.
Right.
The U.S. military is ubiquitous, and they're all over Africa now, too, with AFRICOM.
Right, yes.
So,
Yeah.
and they're calling the military here, I don't know how to pronounce the acronym that the U.S. Pacifica
Oh, yes, the U.S. Pacific Command. Mm-hmm.
Command.
Right.
U.S. Pacific command, but they call it U.S. PACCOM or
Right.
something.
Mm-hmm.
How do they do that?
Yeah.
Do you just say us PACCOM? Or
Yeah, so PACCOM, Pacific
is that how
Command.
they refer to it, just PACCOM?
Right. Yeah,
but
the
then-
oldest of those unified commands in the
Right,
Pacific.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let's get to Duterte and his shenanigans. I mean, that's too kind a word for what he's doing, but
Right, yeah. So Duterte started his presidency with many promises. He called himself a leftist, he even called himself a socialist, and he had a track record, a mixed track record, while he was mayor of a major city in
Right.
Mindanao before, where he did some, pro-people reforms. But very quickly into his presidency, he started to reveal his true intentions and his kind of true character as a fascist president.
right. Well, I understand that as mayor, he was killing drug dealers. And
That's
stuff.
correct. And so he really just brought that same policy to Malacanang, the equivalent of the White House in the Philippines. He's started what's called the war on drugs. Now, we here in the U.S. are familiar with what a war on drugs is. It's a war on the poor.
Right.
And so it's the same thing in the Philippines, a war on the poor. Over 13,000 people have been slaughtered in this so-called drug war.
Right.
Primarily poor people accused of being drug dealers or even just drug users, just
Right.
suspected of that.
Yeah.
And it's clearly a way for Duterte to be able to quell dissent. You're a strong man. He'll shoot to kill orders for the police with impunity and no repercussions. And so he, while there is a sentiment among a lot of Filipinos that there's crime, there's a problem with drugs, he is way overplaying that, expanding his powers to be able to kind of train police to then be able to use those same kind of tactics against political dissenters and anybody who opposes whatever Duterte and his allies in government or the wealthy elite want to do in the country.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand Arroyo was not a whole lot better. I was surprised when I was, kind of doing my homework that she oversaw a lot of extrajudicial killings as well.
Right. So one of the things that has been kind of a hallmark of Philippine politics ever since so-called independence has really been counterinsurgency programs, U.S.-designed counterinsurgency programs, of course. And so in the 2000s, under former President Gloria Arroyo, she served from 2001 until 2010. This was the height of the so-called War on Terror. And with the War on Terror came U.S. military, increased militarization of the Philippines via the Philippine military, and the imposition of what they called a counterinsurgency program to quell dissent, of course, and to crack down on a revolutionary movement which had been being waged since the 1960s, but under the guise of so-called war on terror. So if you dissent, you're labeled a terrorist. They will go after you with military surveillance, harassment, and then even outright extrajudicial killings. So that type of counterinsurgency program is also being used today by Duterte. Under Arroyo, there were over 1,000 people killed during that period. Under Duterte, he's already killed over 100 activists using the so-called war on terror label or the Red Scare, so the war on the revolutionary movement, or this now war on drugs. So he has 3 different wars that he is waging against the people, many different labels that he can throw at anybody who is standing in the way of his agenda.
Mm-hmm. And the Orange Nightmare is going right along with it and supporting it, isn't he?
That's right. So with Trump's visit in November, he was there to, yes, I think make sure that Duterte was going to follow along with U.S. policy. Early in his term, he exchanged those words with Obama. He had talked a big game about being anti-imperialist, wanting to kick out the U.S. troops, wanting to suspend any kind of U.S.-Philippine military exercises. He started to tone down that rhetoric, and then once Trump came into town, he really just rolled over. He even said, "You call me an amboy? I am an amboy. You call me you call me that, I'll call you a terrorist," basically saying, if you oppose me, I will just go ahead, label you a terrorist, and have my army kill you. So when Trump came, there was that kind of affirmation of Duterte and Duterte's position of going along with U.S. policy. And then Trump also saying the Philippines is a prime piece of real estate, exact words, prime piece of real estate from a military standpoint. So it showed that the U.S. has no desire to allow the Philippines to become independent. They want to keep it as a military stronghold, as a place to, in their kind of ring around China, which they want to contain.
Yes, I wanted to get to that.
Yeah, and with all the warmongering against North Korea now, having a base area for the U.S. to be able to launch missiles, or just launch war against North Korea or against China, the Philippines is really key to that, geographically or geopolitically.
Yeah, yeah. It's a damn shame that instead of cooperating with China, they're so busy trying to attack China, and that's just insane.
And China's really not innocent in the Philippines right now either.
Tell me about it.
Sure. So with China, there are these different disputed islands in the region, and some of them are in the Philippines, and China has aggressively started to build along the shores of islands which the Philippines considers its sovereign territory. And then they're also looking into investments in palm oil plantations, into eco-tourist resorts, building roads. So different ways to get a foothold into the country, similar to the way they're doing it in African nations, in Latin America. Interest in mining. Right now, I think one of the most blatant ways that China has also been encroaching on Philippine territory, besides those islands, is in the city of Malawi, which is where there was a conflict between so-called ISIS-affiliated militants and the government earlier this year. The city has been destroyed. The government went in and just started to bomb the city of 400,000 people who had to evacuate. Now that's a city the size of Oakland, and it's empty now. It was a vibrant city, full of people who had to flee for their lives when the government decided to aerially bomb the city to get rid of a handful of so-called ISIS-affiliated militants. Well, now that the city is clear, who is coming in but China and the Asian Development Bank and the World Bank to offer aid to the Philippines to rebuild. Not rebuild for the people who used to live there, but rebuild for ecotourism resorts, or help the military convert it into a base area.
The same old soup warmed over.
Yes, yeah. So that's something else that's happening that's really troubling. When I was there in November, we got as far as about a mile from Malawi City, and we were in evacuation camps doing some relief work, and people talked about how they just want to return home, but they can't, because every time they try to go, the military blocks them. They ask for proof that they used to live there, which they don't have. They fled with barely the clothes on their back. They don't have proof of former residence. And they're watching tanks roll by every day, military tanks going in to, I think, secure the land for foreign investment. So.
You're making me flash on what's going on in Puerto Rico right now. It's almost the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's the same kind of game.
Yeah. It's get rid of the people, take their land.
Yes. how many people have been able to return to New Orleans after Katrina? So it's clear the land, and then the vultures come in.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
And they're bombing Yemen to smithereens and destroying the people. There's famine and the worst cholera epidemic in the world, and it's so tragic. It's heartbreaking to see what this government is doing.
Yes.
Everywhere, you know.
One of the things when I was in the Philippines, we asked the people, they knew we were from the U.S. We were there on a what we call a peace mission in solidarity with the people's struggle for self-determination. And we said, well, what message do you have for the U.S. and the people there? And they said, tell your people that we don't want the U.S. military here. We need the U.S. military to stop sending aid to our military because the military in the Philippines is killing us. We need your government to stop sending aid to our police because the police are killing us. And we need your country to, get your big corporations out of here, which have been stealing our land, logging our forests, mining our ground, polluting our water, and take your troops with you. So they were very clear on what needs to be done and the message that we need to send back to people in the United States.
I'm sure. But lots of luck, huh? What we need is a revolution, and a global revolution, because the imperialist governments, they're happy to keep on killing people.
That's
okay,
right.
But and escalating that effort.
That's right.
Every day,
That's
and it's
right.
so frightening. So I just feel strongly that people of the world, if there ever was a time for that slogan to be, repeated ad infinitum, it's now. People of the world unite, because we've got to come together. We've got to stop all this superficial, shallow stuff.
Yes. Yes.
And come together based on our common humanity and our common needs. We all need food, healthy food, and a roof over our heads, and education and child care and recreation. All the things that human beings need. We all need the same things, so we all need to come together to fight for them, because these multi-billionaires, I forget how many own half the world, something like 3 or something, own half the world's, the combined wealth of half the world. That's 350 billion people, if that's about half of 7 billion, right? So, that is just nuts. So, if the resources of the world have to be redistributed, and the only way that the anything near economic equality is ever going to happen is if we unite. Right? Domestically, internationally, but it's global now, and they're always talking about globalization. And that's a reality. They're talking about reactionary globalization. We need to be talking about revolutionary globalization, because it's happening. We can't stop it. It's a very small world now. And what happens here affects what happens there all the time. We know that. The internet connects us all. And we just have to come together and fight. Fight.
That's right.
And feel for people no matter where they are. Or we're going to lose our humanity too.
That's right.
I wanted you to talk a little bit about the New People's Army.
Sure.
Will you give our viewers a little history of that?
Yes, yeah. So you were talking about the need for revolution, and one of the longest running revolutionary movements in all of Asia has been waged by the Communist Party of the Philippines and the New People's Army since 1968-69.
Right.
So
I'm
now
kind of
it's,
following them as
yeah.
best I can. They don't give you much information about them, though.
No. So nearly 50 years now, actually. And it has been a movement fighting for the national liberation of the country. So trying to break free from U.S. imperialism, and then also overthrow the ruling classes of Philippine society. And then concretely what it means to the everyday person is They want land. They want land to till, to farm, to be able to sustain themselves. They want an economy that is actually geared toward jobs for the masses, not jobs that keep people poor. And they want to industrialize so that it's a sustainable economy that can provide the kind of jobs that people need, that can develop the infrastructure that people need to survive, to have basic industries for the self-sustainability of the country. Very simple. Healthcare for everybody, education for everybody, the respect of women, and it's to me, it doesn't seem like a pie in the sky type of vision. Like
No.
you were saying earlier, it's the basic things that everybody needs.
That we need.
And so that's what the platform that they're fighting for. They've been demonized, of course, by both the Philippines and the U.S. Right now, the New People's Army and the Communist Party of the Philippines are both on the Foreign Terrorist Organization list of the United States.
No doubt.
Right, and Duterte recently said that he wants to keep them on. He has labeling them again as terrorist organizations, even though at the beginning of his presidency he said, they're not terrorists. They are fighting for the needs of the people, and yes, I'll engage in peace negotiations with them. And while the first few rounds of peace negotiations were actually making progress, the two parties were the government and the National Democratic Front, which is representing the Communist Party of the Philippines and the New People's Army. They had actually...
Say that again? There was a front?
Yeah, it's called the National Democratic Front of the
And
Philippines.
they consist of who?
Of the CPP and the NPA and other
Okay, the New People's Army, the Communist Party, and the other one?
National Democratic Front of the Philippines. So it's sort of the United Front organization that engages in peace talks and
good.
with the government.
Good.
Now, the first few rounds went pretty well. They were actually starting to forge agreements on this. It's called the Comprehensive Agreement on Social and Economic Reforms. So trying to negotiate terms of what would land redistribution look like. What could, an economy for the people and rather than for profit look like. And they were getting closer and closer to negotiating a deal. And as they got closer, we saw the Duterte government start to really bog down the peace process, actually suspend the peace process, and then just recently Duterte has said, that's it, we're not engaging in this peace negotiation process anymore, I'm terminating it. And so it's clear that they weren't ever really interested in negotiating for reforms, that it was all just a show.
Just a show.
Just a show. Yeah.
Oh.
But many people were really supportive of it and hopeful that it could lead somewhere, but not under Duterte.
Well, Rhonda Ramiro, it's been wonderful talking to you. I want to give you a few minutes to say some last words or whatever you want to share with the audience.
Thank you, Kilu. So one of the things I was most inspired by when I was in the Philippines is that in the face of all this repression, the people's resistance in so many different forms is alive and well. So you do have the armed movement of the New People's Army, and I hear from the people we interviewed, they were saying, sometimes I feel like giving up everything I have and just joining, and going to the mountains and joining the armed revolution, because they feel like there's no other option for them.
It probably isn't.
Yeah, the way that
sounds like it is.
Right.
There is no other option.
The way that the trade union activists and the faith-based clergy are being gunned down, slaughtered, or slapped with trumped-up charges by the government just for their activism, is really pushing people to the limit and feeling like there's very little room for open democratic struggle anymore.
Right.
So many people are saying they would consider joining the armed revolution. And you also still have the people who are fighting the government through legal means, through the courts, through the protest actions. We were at protests every day, through land occupation. So we do have peasants and farmers and indigenous people who, in spite of the military repression or the military coming in to try and push them off their land, they're staying and they're occupying it, sometimes under threat of gunpoint. They just stay there. It's very inspiring. And then you have so many young people, so many youth who are leaving the cities and coming into the rural areas, which are 75% of the country still, and lending their support to schools, to the farm worker organizations, and yes, just trying to support the people's struggle in those ways too.
Right on.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's hope.
There's hope.
It springs eternal.
That's right. And it's a young movement. It's a multi-generational movement, and it's alive and well. And even with the repression, with the killings, with the political imprisonment, people are not backing down from this Duterte regime.
Well, that's really good to hear. Well, I can't thank you enough, Rhonda, for coming, and especially on short notice. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'll have to have you back for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Rhonda Ramiro of Bayan, USA.
Yes.
And we're going to take a short musical interlude, and then we're going to come back with Favia Kuji Chagolia. So stay tuned.
We found out how many miles a cannonball has to travel to catch a speeding train. Check it out. A coal train. Quick like, exotic flight, bird like, slippery with wet like, dolphins dancing and Eric Donkey trains. Where Brother Max from spoke, Aaron Arnold say the same antidote. Like Albert Isla H with the pain of legacy still under construction. The true creativity sits from the lips of Miriam Kiva, spitting no lacquer from the sacks of paper. We are living legends, patient embryos. Release, 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 release. Sing a song of pure elevation. Crescendo to new highs with outlaw center. Meditating transition, be like the blues of machete minutes at the evils of society. It's the cavalry to the aim of a race, finding little place in the annals of eternity. Orchestrate a harmonic ideal. Paint a kaleidoscope of life. Scrutinizing peacock prisms for pitfalls, and then stand tall, shine bright. Bring all the pieces of the puzzle together. Boogie woogie ain't gonna stay in movement. Sidestepping genocide in poetic stance. Hey, giant steps, straight ahead, truth total. Every time we explore the third eye, be bold enough to exonerate garbage dreams, ignite desires. The people are dying for a divine healing. In the tradition, we keep on dealing. Duke Ellington, Sorenville Hurston, Fantasy, Muhammad Ali, James Baldwin. Ain't there still more to be said, and we have just begun. But we on the evolution, and we've got the revolution won. We on the evolution, and we've got the revolution won. Choose your weapons. Choose your weapons. Pick an axe, keyboard, bass, drums, or sax. Once I looked at your body, read the book, paintbrush or pen, we are all in this together. Coin your culture, classify your dance, call it up, label it jazz. It's a serious bag. Our martial arts, PhD survival tactics. That lets every musician blues it, then turn around and jazz it, makes every dancer do it, and lets every artist a part of it, and lets every poet know it. Yeah, we are the evolution, and we've got the revolution won. We are the evolution, and we've got the revolution won. O-N-E-1. We got the revolution won. O-N-E-1. We got the revolution won. Say what? Say O-N-E-1. We got the revolution won. Say O-N-E-1. We got the revolution won. O-N-E-1. We got the revolution won. Say O-N-E-1. We got the revolution won.
Might as well let her introduce them all. We don't want to leave anybody out. There you go. All right. And we're blessed to have our live artists right here.
I'm blessed to be here.
What don't you do?
Oh my gosh.
Fabia Kujichagulia, author, griot, warrior scholar, and spoken word musician, is a true Renaissance woman who for the past 40 years has utilized education and the arts to fight racism and all forms of social injustice. Kujichagulia is a former professor of ethnomusicology and African civilizations at Stanford University and World College West. She was a member of the Culture and Spirituality Committee of the U.S. delegation to the Second World Conference Against Racism. Oh, yes. In Barbados, 2002. She's been a columnist with Jazz Now magazine and the San Francisco Examiner online newspaper, and her latest books are Recognizing and Resolving the Roots of Racism and Elephant in the Room, an anthology of articles, essays, and poetry by Phoenix Fire. A prison rights advocate, Sister Kujichagulia, meaning self-determination, was resident literary artist at San Quentin and DVI prisons. She is one of our Bay Area cultural artists spotlighted in the Arcadia Publishing book series, Images of America, Black Artists in Oakland. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank
Again,
you.
to freedom is a constant struggle.
I love being here. Because it is a constant struggle and we never stop.
Yes.
And as we just heard, it's a constant struggle all the way around the world.
Yes, it is.
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Yes.
We need to be focusing on that.
Yes, we do. And you have some poetry I want to hear.
I do.
We need some art.
I'm going to do a piece,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna first run through this in a little information, because what I like to do is focus on epistemology, because what happens is that we have all this information in our heads and we really don't
You
analyze.
might want to explain that. Everybody's not going to know
how
what that
we
means.
got our epistemology.
Epistemology.
So epistemology is the origin of one's knowledge. So last month everyone was pulling out turkeys. This month everyone's pulling out trees, cutting down trees. But where did we learn that? How did we learn that? How did we come to these concepts that we think are useful and beneficial and true, but we don't really know how we came to about that information, which is the epistemology. And unfortunately, our epistemology is American. It is not our own. So we have to get back to our epistemology and the origins of our knowledge, which is a totally different culture than American culture. For example, Ubuntu is a concept that I love. It's an epistemology that deals with the reality of community, which is the total antithesis of communism. So under Ubuntu, the concept is it doesn't matter how happy, satisfied, or content one person is or one group is. Unless everyone is happy, it's irrelevant. So I like Ubuntu. And Ubuntu is the opposite of capitalism, because when under capitalism, it doesn't matter who you hurt, who you kill, who you enslave, who you imprison. As long as you make a profit, go for it. So it is the opposite of that. And I like to practice that and promote that concept.
But I didn't understand when you said, I get it when you say it's the opposite of capitalism, but I didn't understand when you say it's the antithesis of communism.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I say that? Please forgive me. It is the antithesis of capitalism.
Oh, okay. I didn't think you meant.
It is pro-communism.
Oh, okay.
Pro-socialism. It is the antithesis of capitalism.
I got you. Okay.
Ooh, thank you.
Yeah.
Can't let that slip. And
well, sometimes we say things, we misspeak, and we say a word that we hadn't meant to say. I've done it many times and when I go to review the thing, oh my God, that's not what I meant to say.
Thank you for catching that.
No problem.
Definitely, because ironically, language is power. Words are the most powerful weapon we have at our disposal.
Yes.
And your language is your culture. Your culture is your language. That's why there's no such concept as Ubuntu in the English language or the American English language. It doesn't exist. Yeah. All those concepts about humanity, humanism, justice, compassion, those are concepts that are alien to this culture. So you don't find too many words of that stature here. But our culture is not only our greatest weapon, it is our greatest wisdom, which is why we are constantly separated from it. We are given this foreign language that I'm speaking right now with all these foreign concepts, and I constantly have to make sure that when I'm speaking, I mean what I say what I mean, and put the right word in the right place for the right result. And that's what we can do with culture and language. So the words reveal names and words, which is why I had to change my name to Kujichagulia. And words reveal our relationship to others and our position in the world. So it's no surprise that we are all given this language that degrades women, degrades people of color, degrades poor people, because that is the position we want to maintain, or that America wants maintained under capitalism. So we constantly have to make sure that we are utilizing language that brings us together as opposed to language that divides us. Because once we're divided, we can't unify as 99% and eliminate the 1%. So we are constantly defending, unfortunately, words that divide us as opposed to acknowledging the history that unites us. We just heard a lot about that history that unites us. It's going on in the Philippines, Haiti, it's going on all over the world. And instead of looking at the things that bring us together as a people, we are distracted. And culture, American culture, the entertainment industry especially, is used to distract and divide us. So people are more concerned with popularity than they are with principles. We know that prior to white supremacy, black people were looked at as gods all around the world. It was the tradition, the virgin, the Black Madonna and the Child, which was later whitewashed. All these were concepts that people saw that were godlike qualities. Now that whole thing has been changed, and now we are given dog-like qualities. So we went from being G-O-D to being D-O-G. And now we have language that proves it for us. So instead of being the progenitors of the human species 3.5 million years ago, now we've been removed completely from the human species, and now we're canine, B-I-T-C-H. Now we're bovine, cow, heifer. Not even human anymore. All promoted in the music industry, in the entertainment industry. And now we have no problem calling each other these ridiculous terms because, again, we're our relationship to each other and the world. So it's up to us to really take control of our language so that we take control of our destiny.
It's like my brothers calling each other dog.
Thank you. And none of this has been done by accident. Mm-hmm. So, like the Snoop Dogg, everybody's a dog, you know, mm-hmm. Woof woof, bow wow. It's just insane. As opposed to, what's up, God? How you doing? How you doing, Goddess? How are you, Queen? It's a totally different concept. So children hear this language and they become indoctrinated in white supremacy and capitalism, even though we aren't consciously doing it. Simply using that language, we do that. So a lot of the words that we have been given under this culture, third world, first, second, third is last, minority, less than, people of color, everybody has color, nobody's translucent, but it's still this whole divide and conquer concept. To this day, we're still calling ancestors our slaves. We say slave trade as if it was an even, fair exchange. We have all these words that we are really not consciously analyzing. Mm-hmm. We just accept them and then we use them. People ask, we regurgitate them. People ask, oh, do you like classical music? And I say, yeah, I love African American classical music. What kind of classical music do you like? Because we've been taught if it's classical, it's European. We've been taught if it's civilized, it's Caucasian. And we're not thinking this through. So we have the word alien, and we don't even realize that Caucasians are alien to the Western Hemisphere, but they don't call themselves alien. Right. White supremacy does not allow us to call Caucasians alien, but these aliens come into the Western Hemisphere and call the people indigenous to the Western Hemisphere, black and brown people, aliens. So we've had the script flipped on us so much that we don't even think about it anymore. Right. Like we don't hear words like Roman tribe, primitive Greeks, but the Romans were primitive. prior to African culture and Asian culture and all kind of cultures, but we have been taught to use words which demean us and divide and conquer. So I'm constantly focusing on our words, and one of the ones I really look at is the word Western, because in the Western Hemisphere, Western culture, Western medicine, Western education was black and brown prior to
You don't have to
colonization.
inject something. When you said that, the first thing that flew through my mind was when we were active in the anti-apartheid struggle. I noticed that South Africa was always called the West.
Wow.
It was referred to as a West. It was lumped in with the Western countries.
Right.
And I said, yeah, that's.
Yeah, because under racism, Western means white.
I guess.
It's a code word for white.
Yeah.
And they were talking about the white administration.
The
in
white
South
capitalist
Africa.
administration.
Right.
That's what they were talking about. White capitalist
Yes.
countries and white capitalist
administrations.
administration.
And the only time we maybe think about that is during November when it's Thanksgiving. And then we might actually use the word Western to mean the people of the Western Hemisphere. Well, if we're not using it year-round, we are not acknowledging the original inhabitants of the Western Hemisphere. So I'm constantly using words which identify the truth and the reality of our situation. Like people are practicing, I call it capitalist mess. Other folks call it Christmas, but it's a capitalist mess they were practicing this month. And everything that we support is not our culture, it's someone else's culture.
Yeah, I just think it's really sad that it has become a capitalist mess, like you say, and I agree with you. It really is. But on the other hand, it's so sad that the birth of Jesus, who, regardless as to whether you think he was the Son of God or whether you think he was a revolutionary, or he must have been a great man.
And he was definitely a revolutionary. That's why the Romans had to get rid of him.
Exactly. I think he was a revolutionary myself. But so I have no problem honoring his birth and celebrating it. But
Definitely.
this commercial stuff is just ridiculous.
Yeah, the commodification of everything
insane,
is horrible. It's
and
horrible.
it just makes these fat caps richer every year. And
most corporations are actually going out of business by October. And that's why in November, which Thanksgiving used to be in December, and the capitalists, they wouldn't have enough time to recoup our losses. So they moved it to November, give them time. And now it's 3 a.m. to go outside and help these corporations recoup their losses. So we rescue many corporations in November and December.
Of course.
With this capitalist mess.
That's when they make their money.
That's when they make their money. Mm-hmm. And that's when we have all our power. Don't spend your
that
money.
Insanity of the Friday, and that which is moved up to Thursday now.
Yes. And it lasts now 3 weeks.
I'm proud to say I've never gone shopping on any one of those days. But I don't even go shopping anymore. I just don't.
I try my best not to participate in any of it.
Yeah, really.
So
I can't find anybody that acts right. I mean, they're just not exploiting, workers in China and Bangladesh and Vietnam. So
somewhere they're being exploited for somebody to have this. So it's up to us to
clothing,
stop it.
I just
totally.
Yeah.
So I like to focus on our brain. Because it doesn't matter what goes on economically, politically. If you're insane, it's going to be insane economics, insane education, insane politics. So we've got to change the way people think so that we can change the way people behave. So I like to focus on epistemology, the origins of our knowledge. And so some of the things that I like to do, I will never say, in America, I call it the Western Hemisphere. There is no democracy in this region. I call it capitalist republic. America wants us to be tolerant, but you do not tolerate inhumanity.
Right.
People talk about, we have to protect American interests. Well, America's interest is imperialism. We use the word justice system, and we know there's no justice. So I call it the injustice system. Yeah. There's no such thing as race. We're all human beings.
That's
race
right.
is a misnomer, so I never use the word race unless it's in front of the word or behind the word human race. But phenotype is the way people look. It's not race, it's phenotype. America likes to pretend that there's a race problem, but we have a racism problem, not a race problem.
That's
They like to
right.
pretend we have an immigration problem. There's no immigration problem in America. There's a racism problem. We were talking earlier, the majority of the immigrants in the United States are Caucasian. They're Canadian, Argentinian, Russian, German, because you come here and you hide, you blend in. ICE is not looking for you, but they're the illegal aliens in the area. So we have all these words that we have been given which deny the reality of our situation. And one way we can change that immediately is start using words that tell the truth. Because the first thing children hear, but long before they go to school, are words.
Oh, yeah.
And we're programming them constantly with our language. So if they hear the words American
And body language.
and our body language, and if they are constantly hearing American democracy, they will believe America's a democracy.
Right.
So we've got to be very
That's
careful
a good point.
put the truth out.
Uh-huh.
I refuse to say RIGHT wing, the racist wing. Because the children think, well, why are you fighting them if they're right? So we've been given this language to validate, to exonerate our own oppression, to exonerate and validate white supremacy racism. We have to stop that. And we have the power to do that every day. And
That's
we give
right.
that power away. Instead, we are using other people's words, and then other people are controlling our behavior because we are using their words.
Right.
And power is simply the ability to control the reality of others.
Right.
And our reality is totally distorted because we've been living someone else's culture.
Okay, we got about, I don't know how many minutes left. I'm bad at this. 5.
So
That's enough time for our...
a piece, yeah. Let's
Piece.
do
Come on.
one of the
We got
pieces
to
I
have it.
like. I am constantly aware that we are at war. Doesn't matter, you can walk into a store, you can drive down the street, we are still at war. It's a very covert war, but it's at war all the time. So this piece is more war. We are at war, we are at war, W-A-R war, we are at war. Warlords pimp the planet, they're playing God. Bullies with Bibles, bullets, and bombs use weapons of mass destruction to kill freedom in the name of peace. These signs reveal the mark of a beast, trying to hide behind a blind media blitz to escape their impending apocalypse that seeks to destroy all humanity except that privileged few, a mere 1%. Less than 400 families planned a space shuttle away so they can stay in some post-apocalyptic colony. Now, does that feel like democracy? Does that look like diversity? Is that justice and liberty? Widening the gap between the greedy and needy, profiting from homeland insecurity by bankrolling terrorism in the 21st century. Just as cold as they want to be. And like nuclear arms at their side, they're protected by the high-tech digital divide. Leap across or get left behind the war lords and virtual deities, constantly christening clones and drones programmed by everything. Clones and drones programmed for everything. Clones, drones, allies, enemies, fighting a rival for an adversary. And all the while, 1% of the population attempting to control everything. America is dumbing down human beings. America is dumbing down human beings with artificial intelligence for species dominant machines. So 24/7 we are monitored by cybersecurity, smart meters, the FCC, billions spent on national security, but nothing is secure in this country. Instead of making the country safe, it has evolved into a police state where personal privacy has become extinct thanks to total and complete surveillance and secrecy. Secretly, we are targeted and caught in their crosshairs, wiretapped and tracked on their radar, like sitting ducks stuck on the web, just a click away, a glitch on the grid, living under cover of covert scrutiny. Citizens treated like public enemies by private entities and government agencies. TRW, Equifax, ATF, IRS, Coast Guard, National Guard, Blackwater contracts, Patriot Act, PD, HP, FBI, ICE, CEA, DEA, NSA, TSA, the nouveau COINTELPRO. It's the final showdown, justice and democracy against the global war for more, and more war. wealth and riches. Wealth and riches for those 1% of sons of riches always wanting more. More terrorism, more imperialism, more fascism, more greed, more Machiavellian militarization, more white supremacy. It all leads to coup d'etat politics for cheap labor overseas and a prison industrial complex desperate to squeeze more corporate profits from a dying economy. So high rates of incarceration, no surprise. Capitalism needs and feeds off enslaved labor to survive. That's why the injustice system keeps it well supplied with millions upon millions of black and brown lives. Now, does that look like diversity? Does that feel like democracy? Is that justice and liberty? And what about the many political prisoners and prisoners of war surviving psychological torture, solitary confinement, condemned to death for defending truth and justice? For defending truth and justice, you know what you get? More prison privatization and peonage, more foreign invasion and espionage, more class propaganda and false pretexts for the prison military industrial complex, more war. More war and bloody altars of debt. More crusades for jingoism. Everybody praise the Lord and pass the ammunition because America's on a mission for more.
Whew, that was incredible.
We need more.
We gotta go.
And we need more WAR, y'all. We need more
Thank you
warriors
for
and
tuning in to
revolutionaries.
Freedom is the Constant Struggle. Thank you, Jackie Perez, for board hopping. Thank you, Fabia Cucci Chagalia. And thank you, Rhonda Ramiro.